How's everyone doing? Good, all right. My time has not started yet. All right. So I thought long and hard about what I wanted to share with you guys today. And after mulling it over and over and over again, the only thing that I could think of that I could share with amazing teachers is this idea of what it means to not just teach, but teach to bear witness. The image that you're seeing was created by an artist for a piece for the New York Times, and it shows this whole concept of bearing witness. And if you look at it, these faces have no noses or mouths, they just have eyes. And when the artist sort of created this piece, he was doing it in response to this idea that because of all that's going on in the world today, people have a tendency to just run to places where events are happening for the very sake of going there so they could feel like they could bear witness to it. So when events were going on in Ferguson, people didn't care what was going on. They just wanted to get on a plane and fly down there and be there just so they could say, I was bearing witness to the event. And to bear witness is a powerful construct because it means in some way there's something in your heart that says, I want to be there to experience this with the people who are going through it. But we do a very flawed version of bearing witness as a public, and it's something that I think teachers need to be doing better, and that they do already, but just need to have a name for it. And it's this: you bear witness to the reality of somebody's experiences, but you can't fully bear complete witness until you understand where the events came from. You can't fully bear witness until you understand the nuances of the experience. And so if you only go to bear witness with your eyes, but you can't also testify, then it's not truly bearing witness. The other thing about bearing witness is that you can't just bear witness when you're in the moment in a sanitized space, yet you have to bear witness beyond the immediate. So let's bring this idea of bearing witness, seeing beyond, this idea of using your eyes but also speaking into the classroom and into schools and what we do every day. As an educator, your work is to bear witness to the students. So in that classroom, you sit there and your eyes are open and you watch them. And your job first is just to witness how they express their brilliance within the confines of that classroom, right? But what happens if the structure of the classroom has been manipulated to the point where you're only witnessing some version of the student while they're there? So then you think you're doing the work to bear witness, but you're only witnessing some really small piece of the authentic realities of those young people. So if you're truly to bear witness, what do you have to do? You're going to have to leave the confines of the classroom and go into the context where they're embedded and fully witness the full person. Otherwise, what you get is a very sanitized version of who you think you're teaching. When we bear witness, we also have to bear witness to the histories. So we have to think about not just the students, but our school. How do you bear witness to your school? You observe yourself in the school, of course. But to bear witness means to understand where your school comes from, how your school was built, and most importantly, the traditions that your schools were built upon. So if you're thinking about a student, and you're thinking about the school, you have to think about the unconscious, the things you don't quite see. The unconscious is defined as the part of the mind that is not accessible to the conscious mind, but it affects the behavior and the emotions. When you have a student in that classroom expressing a behavior, the behavior is not what you're truly seeing. You're seeing a reflection of the unconscious self beyond the classroom. And also in the school, when you have your rules and your curriculum and your norms and your modes of engagement, you're seeing what you've been handed, but you're not truly understanding the unconscious of the school. And Durkheim says so brilliantly, it's like poetry to me, that history is the true unconscious. So while we may not be able to understand the unconscious of the school, we can very well understand the history that brought us to the types of schools that we have today. In particular, for the kind of students that you have in front of you today, the African American and Latino students in DISD. How do I bear witness to the experiences of those students? How do I bear witness to the full experience of my school? How do I understand the traditions that my schools were birthed from? You understand that by tracing back to how we've learned how to school students and how all of that tradition is birthed from this. This is the Carlisle School, a school that was created for the purpose of educating Native American populations. And what the Carlisle School did was go across the country to tribes everywhere and get a bunch of students and bring them to this location and say, we're going to educate you, we're going to make you better. And the intention behind that, if you witnessed it on the surface level, you're saying, of course you want to bring them to this place and make them better. And so you have all these students with their varied traditions and their varied ways of knowing and being brought into the school, and they were going to get educated. And to get educated meant that they have to cut their hair and sit in rows, and they have to take this amazing picture that you're watching that shows the sanitized version of who they are. And if we witnessed them just like this, you would say, this is who they are. But to really, really bear witness, you have to go back to the places that they came from before they were inside that school. And if we don't do that, then we're just living an inauthentic representation of the student and the institution. So if that's the case, and this happens with the Carlisle School, you say, well, you know, Chris, this is stuff that just happened before. I mean, you're just showing me one picture. And you had this idea here of, you know, of what's that phrase? Kill the Indian and save the man, which was the phrase that was the moniker of the person who was in charge of the school. But have we ever thought about the fact that kill the Indian and save the man sounds horrific, but kill the hip hop and save the student doesn't? Have you ever thought about the fact that kill the Indian and save the man sounds awful, but you want to extract the Latino culture from the young people in the classroom so you can show that they're better and no longer ELL? Who says to be ELL is flawed? Who says that killing the authentic representations of the cultures of the young people means that they become better? I would argue that we teach them to be so standardized and normalized that we lose on the long run. See, the Carlisle School's big ad, if you were to call it an ad at the time, was the picture that you're seeing here. And the first picture were these populations when they first got to the school, and the second was 3 years later when they got out. If you look at these two images, it's the same three people, but now a leg is crossed. It's more debonair. The attire is different. The rules of engagement are different. But the question I want to ask you is this: what happens when that person who transformed over the course of 3 years, and you bear witness to their supposed transformation for the better, goes back into the communities that they were extracted from? What happens is that they become a shell of their former selves. And what happens is that you create a divide between the two parts of the communities to the point where no one collectively gets any better. And that is today. Because the one thing that we were able to identify when we left the confines of the Carlisle School, when historians left the stories about what's going on in Carlisle and went back into the community, was that education was happening there anyway. Was that fathers would teach sons and mothers would teach daughters and vice versa. And there were community circles where they learned all the norms and the traditions of their places, and they learned how to understand the land and to delve deeply into it. And in those spaces, what they all had in common was not their haircuts. What they all had in common was that the learning space was sacred. When you entered into the place where we exchange information, that is like the height of your spirituality. And so if the learning place is sacred, and then we extract people from where they were and embed them in something else, guess what we're doing? We are desecrating the sacred. We desecrate the sacred by extracting the authentic realities of those young people into the classroom. And what's sicker about that is the desecration of a sacred space, when somebody goes to teach in a place where they're not authentically allowed to be themselves, is that they will experience what sociologists call symbolic violence. And when somebody experiences symbolic violence, guess what that is? It's like that feeling of tension, I don't quite fit in here. That feeling when they experience that is that they can't learn. And so you go through a process of schooling them, extracting their culture, and then they get into that place and they experience symbolic violence and don't learn, and then their lack of learning is then used for a justification for why you have to do what you did wrong with more intensity. So you look at classrooms in 1890 and classrooms in 1990 and classrooms in 2014, and essentially, some are color and some are black and white, but the structures in the classroom remain the same. You know, what was so powerful as I came up here today is hearing that poem and then watching, you know, the crowd all just bob and move as they listened to Marvin Gaye. And the question I asked myself is there a space for Marvin Gaye and poetry to exist in every single classroom? When we extract ourselves from the classroom, we feel like we are free enough to engage in those conversations. How about those are the places in those classrooms where that non-traditional, non-structured avenue of teaching and learning has to exist? When I talk about symbolic violence and understanding that, it's understanding that PTSD is a phenomenon that's just not a post-traumatic stress disorder, that PTSD is a post-Trayvon Martin stress disorder. That when young people are in classrooms and we extract the authentic realities of their experiences out of the classroom, they're experiencing violence every day because they have no therapy. They have no place to breathe. And the job and the role of the teacher is not just to teach them information, it's to bear witness to that experience, knowing that when you look on TV and you saw somebody that looked like you, with a hoodie on like you wear your hoodie, who was killed in cold blood, and you go into the classroom every day and they say, no, we just have a curriculum to follow, it means that you're not bearing witness to my realities. And when you don't bear witness to my realities, you force me to experience symbolic violence, and I will not and cannot learn. The question these kids are asking is, will you see me? Will you let me be? Will you bear witness to me? Will you let me breathe? And I like this idea, and I want to play with this idea of letting me breathe because it's significant for many reasons. Like, look, let me move this. When you are in a social space that forces you to conform, sometimes you take pieces of that thing and make it part of yourself. I'm from the Bronx, I'm from the hood. I like wearing ties because I think ties are fly. No one had to teach me, Chris, you should now wear a tie. Over the course of my life experiences, knowing who I am and where I came from, I choose to wear one because that's who I am. However, my wearing of the tie, if I go into a classroom wearing it, and each time I try to use my slang, you choke that out of me. You tighten the nooses on my tie. Every time you told me that I don't care what happened to Trayvon Martin and don't care about Eric Garner and it's not part of my curriculum, you tighten up my tie even more. Every time a piece of me comes into that classroom, even though I chose to wear the tie, you strangle the life of me anymore and more. And each time, the tie that came as a decor to enter the space with becomes a noose around my neck because you won't allow me to be myself in that classroom. When we reprimand folks for saying that a person couldn't breathe, we do the same things. This image of protest around the country because somebody wrapped their hands around another man's neck and he said, I couldn't breathe 1,000,001 times, haunts us daily. We protest. But do we bear witness to the realities of young people? Do we think about how our curriculum and our standards and our norms and our rules of engagement choke the authentic life out of students every day? When will we let them breathe? Thank you.